Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar today. Our focus topic is sharing good practices for ways to improve your ability to plan, manage, and report on your most critical organizational assets, which are resources, across your projects using Microsoft's PPM solution. My name is Sarah Howard, and I'm with the Microsoft Gold partner called Progility. We've been implementing Microsoft PPM solutions for about 16 years now for large enterprises, including everything from engineering, construction, IT, and new product development. People tend to get a hold of us when they can't easily explain what's going on across all of their projects. They don't know what resources are working on what work, and they have a hard time getting consistent reports and metrics to make project-based decisions. We offer services and solutions in 3 core areas, the first being deployment and consulting services, which are Progility's core business. Here we provide professional services for successfully planning and implementing Microsoft project and portfolio management, including Microsoft's Project Online, integrating PPM with line of business applications, and delivering strategic portfolio management solutions to support top-level management planning. We also have a growing business intelligence practice that leverages best-in-class solutions such as Microsoft Power BI. Progility offers a set of pre-built software solutions and accelerators based upon 16 years of experience, including a set of Hammerhead products that provide improved access to your cloud PPM data, accelerate access to visual reports and dashboards using Power BI, connecting data between your PPM system and Azure DevOps, Teams, Microsoft Planner, and Active Directory to improve visibility, insight, and control over your work, people, and projects. Finally, Progility provides post-implementation support services, including expert care, which is designed to assist your PMO with gaining on-demand expertise on the solutions supported. We also offer training for your end users and administrators and an e-learning offering that can improve consistency and adoption for your users of your project management tools. We do have a set of upcoming webinars covering topics ranging from improving work and task planning with Project to using Project for the web to manage business projects. All webinars start at 1 p.m. Eastern, and you can register for one or multiple events through the Eventbrite link provided or by searching Eventbrite Progility in your browser. We hope you can join us for these sessions, which were designed based upon your feedback over the last 6 months. If you missed the Progility Virtual Project Conference in April, you can now watch it online. It's broken into 3 sessions, the first being client presentations from the state of North Dakota and Geisinger Health System, sharing their best practices for deployment. Another session on deployment and adoption best practices by Progility. And then finally, there's an entire session with experts from Microsoft talking about Project and their industries and the overall product vision going forward. You can visit the link here, which takes you to the YouTube playlist where these videos are posted, or type in Progility Virtual Project Conference into YouTube. All videos from this and previous series are available on our best practice playlist on YouTube, listed on this page. Topics range from managing your digital transformation program using PPM technologies to integrating PPM with Agile and line of business applications. So feel free to subscribe and access this library at any time and share with your colleagues. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Rob Hirschman, a partner at Progility, who is going to go through our content. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining us for our webinar today. We're going to be focusing on the topic of improving your resource management using the Microsoft PPM solution. In order to do so, we put together an agenda, a targeted agenda. The first thing we'll talk through is really the business problem we're seeing out there from organizations. What is leading people to want to address this resource management challenge, and what are the different things you want to look at when you think about planning for addressing resource management. We'll then break down the different components that are in the Microsoft Project Portfolio Management Solution or Project Online today, designed specifically to support resource management processes. We're going to get into some detail here and show you some examples of those. Towards the end, we're going to wrap this up to talk about what do I really need to do to get started? What are some of the key considerations to really start implementing resource management in a crawl, walk, run kind of approach, which is what most organizations want to do. They want to get started and get down the road, but they know they can't go full Monty with it until they have better processes and systems in place. And finally, We'll share some good practices for how you can go about planning and implementation of Microsoft PPM as it relates to addressing resource management as one of your key requirements. We do have some time at the end reserved specifically to talk, to listen to you and actually answer any questions you have. So as we go through this, if you want to hold your questions to the end and put them in the Q&A manager or the IM window, we will take them at the end. Let's jump right into our topic. And what we really want to talk about is, when we talk about resource management, the first thing we want to look at is what is the business problem most organizations are facing? And if we look at a large organization, enterprise, there's really two sets of key stakeholders as it relates to resource management. The first set of stakeholders on the left are the project owners, and these are the folks that are making investments and they're looking for results, whether they're implementing a new system, whether they're updating an application, whether they're going to market with a new product. They're investing a certain amount of capital and also resources, and they want to get returns on that capital in a certain way. On the right side, you have what we call functional or resource managers, and these are the people in a large enterprise that own the resources needed to deliver on those projects. A lot of times those are cross-functional resources, meaning they're not just working in an IT organization. They may be specialists in a process like financial management, operations, sales, human resources, whatever that is, where we need to take those resources and use them on our project in addition to pure IT resources that may be doing software development or infrastructure application development. And what we find is there are typically conflicting interests between these two sets of stakeholders. On the left, we have the owners who want results. They're focused on the money and the business case. They request the people to deliver on the projects. And they want to deliver everything in a project base. They want to know what they're going to get and when they're going to get it. So what are the core deliverables I'm going to get? The folks on the right are much more focused on people management. They want to make sure their people aren't overbooked or overutilized, so they stay with the organization. They want to make sure these folks have the right skills and they're always growing those skill sets, whether they're IT or non-IT related. They want to make sure they're hiring and retaining the right talent, so they don't always have to be going out to market to find new people. And finally, they're going to have people in a certain specialization. If you're an organization that does healthcare software, you're going to have people that know the healthcare business and the software side of that as well. Or maybe if you're in the state and local government organization, you know about billings and financial management in a state and local government organization, how that's different from being in a private sector organization. So you can see we initially have a conflict between these two different groups. And we did a poll about 3.5 years ago, and we found that 95% of the large enterprises that we polled named resource management their key organizational challenge. It's their top priority to address because they were really finding they didn't have enough resources. They had more than enough work, and especially after everything we've been through with COVID over the last 18 months or so, there's a lot more work and a lot fewer people available to do that work. So we're assuming people are going to just do that work whatever time it takes. And a lot of times there's little internal data to support what are the best resources for the job to determine who's going to be working on what projects. So you can see we inherently have some challenges organizationally and from a people perspective as to resource management. And if we shift over to how organizations are structured today, really in the 50s, 60s, 70s, up through the 80s, everything was really functional line management, where you had finance and operations and HR and sales and IT, and they were really lined up with specific functional managers. On the far right, we have project-based organizations. This is a lot more popular in a consulting firm or anybody that does professional services, but the mid to late 90s saw kind of the lining up of a project-based organization. Hey, let's line up project teams around the work we need to deliver. And that's actually kind of morphed into agile teams now. If you think about it, what used to be traditional project teams are now agile teams. But what we see as the most predominant method of owning resources is really what you see in the middle here. And that's matrixed or ownership and organization, where you're taking resources that are cross-functional from different groups or departments, and you're applying them to different projects. You still have line management, but you also have project managers. You may have product managers or product owners, and you also have agile teams. And working in this dynamic environment, we're always borrowing resources. So we really need to understand what people are working on so we make sure they're not overutilized, they stay with the organization, we keep organizational skills, all the things you saw on the last slide. So working in a matrixed organization with all the change going on inherently has some challenges. So if we start breaking down what people work on a day-to-day basis, there's really three kinds of work we typically see are out there. And most people focus, just on the project piece. But the project piece is anywhere from 30 to 40% of the total work. People are going to spend time on what we call operational work or KTL or KTLO time, which is things like keep the lights on maintenance, business as usual work, keeping servers running or supporting a help desk request or working on day-to-day work and doing things like that. So that's 10 to 30% of their time. We find that administrative time, which is work time doing things like sitting in meetings, following up with meeting notes, getting the work done, can be anywhere from 5 to 10% of a resource's time. And then that project work will shift. We'll see a shift between 40 to 60% of that time in project-based organizations, or on operational sides, maybe in an infrastructure organization, that 40 to 60% could be over there, and the 10 to 30 could be project work. So what's really important here is understanding that people are going to do more than just project work. So if you're looking at implementing a project management system, unless you determine you're going to be capturing all of their time, you're only going to have a sliver of it to manage. And that becomes a challenge as we move into really different organizational structures. Now with core methodologies not just being traditional projects, where we've got projects, tasks, and activities, but now in an agile world where we see 90% of the organizations we work with have adopted agile in some way, you've got products and features and activities related to that that are managed in a very different way than traditional work. So this creates all kinds of organizational challenges, which we're going to talk about next, but really kind of getting a big picture view of what people are working on across all three buckets is really important to starting to think about addressing resource management. And then we can start to break down that new work challenge of traditional and agile work. Traditional projects, work can be very easily or directly forecasted. We can assign resources to specific tasks and activities. We can baseline that so we have a plan. We can track our actuals, and then we can have a forecast. So in a traditional project-based environment where we're doing traditional waterfall projects, it's pretty direct to do. But when we move our methodology over to Scrum Fall or Agile or Safe Agile in some cases, we're a lot more iterative with our work, which makes it more difficult to forecast. And it doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just you're starting to actually introduce new concepts. So what we need to start doing is gaining a consistent understanding of resources and how they work and how we apply resources to specific Agile work. In Agile, there's really no concept of a baseline. We want to get a product delivered and we're doing it in an iterative way, but we have targets. We just don't have something called a baseline. So we don't know. Jim was supposed to work 80 hours on this. He ended up working 160. Why is that? It's really hard to answer that because of the nature of Agile being iterative. We do have team-based approaches, which makes it really flexible in terms of people being able to pick up different kinds of work. But by allowing the teams to select that on a day-to-day, on a stand-up basis, it actually creates some other challenges with doing resource forecasting if the team is determining that. And finally, that ability to pick up different tasks, it allows for some flexibility. But what we do is we move from a project-centric to more of a product-centric methodology. And Gartner talks a lot about this. So we've got tasks, assignments, and work in a traditional organization. We've got products with epics and sprints and features and user stories with different activities behind it. So we're still managing our work. We're just doing it in a different hierarchy. And we've found really over the last 5 years or so as organizations have spent a lot of time deploying systems to track Agile work. So they've got systems like Azure DevOps or Azure Boards. They've got systems like Jira by Atlassian, where they're allowing the teams to actually manage their work in a flexible, agile way with different boards and doing Scrum work. But how do you track the actuals and the performance, and how do you track all the traditional work all in one place? So these become some of the challenges we started addressing and working towards, and that's when we can start looking to Microsoft's PPM solution to address parts of this. So when we look at it, the first thing we want to do is define what we're trying to address. And in this case, it's all about capacity planning. And resource capacity planning, defined, is a combination. It's not just a tool, but it's a process we're going to use to determine the resources needed in an organization in order to meet the future workload demands, the different projects and products and maintenance work and operational activities that are going to go on. That's going to drive that capacity, whatever we're trying to deliver to the organization. So we really want to think about this as a process and then put it process first. In order to do capacity planning, we have to have a couple of key things in place. We have to look at what we're doing today. What's the current workload and the current assignments of the people? So we have to look at the current book of business. And then we have to be able to forecast into the future. What's the future demand coming in? What's the pipeline of new work look like? And most organizations we work with have a really hard time getting the first one. If you can start getting the first one, you can then start doing the planning on the second one. Without the first, the second one is very, very difficult, almost impossible to do, because you can forecast all you want, but if you don't know who's available and what they're working on, it really doesn't matter. So the real goal of capacity planning is, again, to determine how many resources do you need to meet the needs of the organization, so that you can set realistic business expectations with the stakeholders that were on the left. What can you deliver? When can you deliver it? And if you need to deliver something sooner, what are your options around that? Can you run different scenarios and models around it? So when we start looking at how this happens in Microsoft's PPM or Project Online solution, there are different components built into the tool to support different parts of this process. And there's flexibility around these different components. The first of those is capacity and demand management, the upfront part of the tool that allows you to do resource planning, resource management, but also look at your capacity against your demand and do different kinds of forecasting. And that's really core to any organization that's going to do this kind of work. There's the ability to do resource analysis and selection and actually go in and do different matching of different kinds of resources based off things like skills or location or team or capabilities, and do some detailed analysis on that to do what ifing. There's third down, and it's really important, is the ability to track time and actuals. You have to be able to meet that need of that first bullet, figure out what are people doing today? What does the current workload look like today? How am I going to track that in a reasonable way? And how do I use that to make decisions? And finally, you have to have some kind of reporting so you can get information across all three of these different work streams or processes within the tool and make sure you can support decision making. So what we're going to do now is really break this down. If we start looking at what's in Microsoft's PPM solution to support this, you can see there's 11 different potential components you can start addressing. Each of these is its own unique process area and technology within the tool. We're going to break these down into different components, everything from defining resources to setting up a resource pool to different types of resources that are out there to what's my approach to intake and request. That becomes really, really important. You can see there's a bullet next to that one. That's really important in a hybrid or an agile environment where you've got requests coming in a traditional project, but how am I capturing project requests for agile work? That may be in another system. So how do I have a unified intake process to bring all this information together so I can do demand planning in one place? Have the ability to do resource constraint analysis and run different portfolio scenarios. The time tracking, which we talked about, as well as the other two little carrots you see here, integration with a DevOps environment, that becomes more important as you start adopting Agile and what that integration looks like, if it's automated, manual, or some kind of combination. And finally, the ability to do reporting and analytics, be able to look across, again, different applications, whether it's a system like DevOps or Jira and PPM, or do I want key data in PPM, work managed in Jira and DevOps. So you have lots of options. Really breaking this down, the core of your PPM solution as it relates to resource planning is proper design and setup of your enterprise resource pool. If you get this wrong, everything else kind of falls to the side. The resource pool is the central place you're going to be storing, accessing, and managing all the organizational resources you may use on different projects. Those can be people, they could be generic resources or roles, they could be equipment, they could be dollars or capital. You define all of that in an enterprise resource pool so you have some consistency around the resources you're going to be accessing from that pool. That resource pool is configurable to reflect specific things about your organization and related information. It can also be fed by your enterprise Active Directory to populate it with people that are in the organization that may be working on projects to synchronize their ability to access the tool as well as turn off their access. That becomes really useful in large organizations where you have maybe 2,000 or 3,000 users in the tool. You have people moving around a lot of times and people leaving and coming in and out of the organization. It allows us to provision and deprovision resources in an automated way, so we're not having to go in and turn resources on and off. That can be a huge headache and a lot of administrative burden. Importantly, if you're looking at your PPM solution, there's one resource pool for every instance of Project Online or PWA. So as you start designing it and thinking, well, maybe I'll set up an instance for operations and finance and HR, the problem is you're then going to have 3 different resource pools. You're never going to have one clear look into what resources are working on. So one of the key decisions are, do I get multiple groups into one system, one instance? Do I have shared resources across them? There are different kinds of resources in the tools we mentioned. So we've got what we call human resources. These are people like Jim, who plays a role like a project manager. He is in a certain department. He has certain skills or specializations. He has a capacity. He has a unique calendar. And he may be dedicated to project and non-project work. So what we do is we set up each resource individually. Potentially their manager is responsible for owning those, the functional managers. And that's what we use to determine the actual capacity based on what people are available. We have the ability to group these resources in unique ways, like skills, like Jim is an SAP or Dynamics person, whereas Jane is maybe a specialist in PeopleSoft, but she's in the infrastructure department, so she spends less time on project work and more time on maintenance work. So if I want to find a replacement for Jane, I would match her up to people with similar backgrounds, similar skills, in a similar department. What we do is we use human resources to drive the forecasting and the actual work performance, because people are going to tell us how much they worked against how much was forecasted. And we need those actuals to actually capture the performance so we can reflect the capacity. What are people really working on? And we find that most organizations, once you roll out task tracking and time tracking, they're going to share with you what they're working on, because it helps them show, hey, look, I'm overbooked because you've got me working on 5 projects, working 60 hours a week. They want to share those actuals with you and help you forecast when they can finish so they don't have emergencies and not running around. They're proactively providing that information. So human resources are a very, very important part of the PPM system. The second most important type of resource is something we call generic resources. Think of these as roles. They're going to be used upfront in the early wave planning. So as you think about what projects you're going to do in your funnel or your pipeline, you want to think about what resources do I need? And it's not necessarily going to be for Jim or Jane. It's going to be, I need 1 project manager. I need 2.5 architects. I need 3 developers in order to meet the needs of this project. So I'm doing kind of t-shirt sizing or high level planning here based off a generic profile so that we can monitor our supply against our demand here. What this does, it helps support any kind of headcount management and any hiring decisions. So you can say, well, if we're going to do these 20 projects, we're going to need 31 developers. We're going to need, 18 project managers. We're going to need 600 hours of a SME's time. That helps you forecast against, okay, here's the actual people I have that play that role. Here's what they're already committed to. We're going to have a problem unless we reprioritize. So it lets you have that prioritization discussion. It's also the foundation for any of the constraint management analysis you're going to do in the portfolio management part of the tool. So generic resources are a very, very important part of the tool as well. There was a new type of resource that was introduced in about 2013 or 2014 called team resources. And team resources are a way to logically group resources and assign them to specific activities, because sometimes, like in an Agile project, you're not assigning Jim to a task. You're assigning a sprint team or an Agile team or development team to a set of activities, and then someone from that team, based off the stand-up meeting, is going to pick up that task, work on it for a certain amount of time. So what it does, it's a way to represent a grouping of resources. You can assign team resources to different tasks or activities, specifically when you don't know who's going to do the work, but you know someone from that team is going to perform it. It lets you do, with some of the reporting and roll-ups, team capacity planning. And it's also very, very supportive of moving towards an Agile framework or an iterative framework in your work. So team resources are a really important concept in Microsoft PPM that you're going to look at, especially if you're going down the Agile road. And as we're setting up our resources in the resource pool, we're also going to design our resources based off how our businesses run around people. We set it up different ways. We may have a functional resource manager owning these resources. They're going to be setting up resource calendars, and each resource is going to have a different availability. They have, vacation and time off and things like that, and they've got different exceptions. We're going to set up things like the max available units a resource has. Maybe I want to say he's 100% available, and I'm going to book him against those 3 different categories of work and non-work activities. Or I want to say Jim is only available 50% of the time. The other 50%, I'm just not even going to account for here. I only care about tracking 50% of his time. These are decisions you need to make in the design process. We can also set up costs behind resources, things like, what's the hourly rate for a resource? Is there an overhead on that? Is it just a flat rate based on a role? Or is it a one-time cost? Maybe we're bringing in a trainer for 3 weeks, and every time we bring that trainer in, it costs us 10 grand. And then we can add different notes or information so we know the history of a resource in the organization. So what we're going to be doing is not only setting up the resource, but standard information or metadata about those resources. And you can see these things all go together when we talk about resource management. It's hard to do one without the other. In the tool, in PPM, we also have the ability to set up what we call resource custom fields. These are pieces of metadata that are going to define resources. They're going to allow you to actually group those resources in logical ways. They're going to also drive reporting. So you can see on the right, we've got certain custom fields, such as, what department is the resource from? What part of the organization are they part of? What skills do they have? What cost center are they a part of? Are they CapEx or OpEx? What division do they work for? Are they part of a resource breakdown structure or organizational hierarchy? What level of skills do they have? Do they have a security clearance in the government and things like that? So we have the ability to do all of this different grouping and sorting, and these become primary keys for all of our reporting. So really, really important. Okay. So we're going to be setting up different resource custom fields in the tool. Okay. In addition to this, we are going to have to define some kind of a project and work intake process or methodology in the tool. And that is really the beginning of the request process, where people will put in different requests for different types of work. It could be an enterprise project, an Agile or a waterfall project. It could be administrative activities, keep the lights on maintenance. You want to create the different categories of work because that's going to help you forecast how long things are going to take, but also what resources you need to capture all that information and select the right project type with the right metadata. So having a formalized project funnel or work intake mechanism that's going to feed into your PPM system is really, really important, because that's going to drive all your upfront demand management. And once we've got different requests in, we have different ways we can forecast potential resources on a project. We have something called resource engagements. Resource engagements can be used in 2 ways. They can be used pre-project. An idea comes in or a potential project, and it helps a resource manager or a requester say, I'm going to need certain people on this project. I'm going to need 2 business analysts, 3 developers, whatever it is, for a certain amount of time. And then that will go into a queue, and I can do my t-shirt sizing based off the different roles. Or it can be used during an active project where a project manager can go to a resource manager in an automated way and say, hey, I've got a need. One of my developers is leaving. I need to replace them. Can you please assign a different developer to my project? You can put in that engagement as a project manager. The resource manager can analyze those and then make decisions on who the right resource for the job is, swap out that resource for you. So think of resource engagements as a formalized technology process for requesting resources either early stage or late in the game when you're actually delivering your project. Also important to that intake process is having some kind of approval workflow and having governance around it. This is where you're going to actually move projects based off the size or the type to different request states. You're going to have phases, and then you're going to have stages or steps or activities within those. And one of those may be put in a resource request or an engagement, build a project schedule, detail the resources you need on that. So you can build your resource request when that's going to happen into your overall intake and governance process and automate that process with some of the tools in PPM. Importantly, this governance process sits on top of a project. So don't think of it as the schedule. Think of it as the steps required in order to pre-plan and get approval for and then deliver on that project. Then that workflow, importantly, which is all built in your PPM system, drives consistent processes and good governance. So people aren't going around that and saying, hey, I'm just going to call Jim and see if I can get one of his developers on my project. No, they're going through a formal request process that you're putting in place. So having good governance and controls is really important. When we talk about forecasting resources, and this gets to kind of a little deeper level of detail, there's a couple of options. The first one is to actually build out a project schedule. And that would be something like you will see here, where we'd have a template for a certain kind of project. You have to have some basic schedule maturity. You're involving the project manager up front, but you'll see on this schedule, we're actually putting tasks in here, but we have these generic resources or roles associated with it. That drives our demand. So the upside of this kind of planning is that it fast tracks project planning and it's a lot more accurate. You actually have data behind it, not just saying I need 3 developers. You're saying I actually need 3 developers and here's when I need them and here's why I need them. So you're involving the project planning experts early on in the process, so you have more detail. The downside is you may not have the full level of detail required to build out a project at this point in time. So if you think about, pre-planning for a project where you know the kind of work you're going to do, building it into what we call a schedule ROM or rough order of magnitude is a really, really good approach to do this. And you can do this based off of templates that are built out based on different types of projects. So this all ties into your process. The second way to forecast resources are engagements, as we mentioned before. Upside of this is it's very quick, it's very easy. You can do it for people, you can do it for roles. It can be submitted by a manager for approval. It feeds the portfolio analysis part of it. The downside is you have to put a request in for each type of resource you're requesting. So you literally can't go in and say, I need these 4 resources. You would have to say, I need a developer, I need two analysts, I need these. Each one is a unique request. But it's really, really good for capturing demand at that high level for resources, kind of t-shirt sizing, and also requesting changes in flight. So this is something you can insert in your process if it's relevant. Okay. And the reality is, and what we find from most organizations, they start to use a combination of both. If they have good scheduling discipline and good project management, they can start with the schedule template and move on from there. If you don't have that in place and you're thinking, I want to start kind of higher level and do engagement level planning, you could start with this. But at some point, those two worlds are going to come together and you're going to probably end up using both in certain ways. Once we have our projects and they've been approved and we're kind of making some assumptions that that's happened, we have to do some kind of resource time tracking. That's because we need to know what people are actually working on against what we plan for them to work on. We can have different categories of capturing time, which we're going to talk about. You're typically going to have an approval process. The project work is going to go back to the project manager for approval, and some of the pure non-project activities may go to their resource or functional manager and then over to the manager of the work. But the only way to get accurate actuals and forecast is to get actuals from your team members. You could put that burden on your project managers to go in every week and update actuals. It's just a lot of extra work when you got the team members who are already doing the work. So it may be a cultural change for a lot of organizations, but really having your team members own this part of the process becomes really important to engaging them in the overall life cycle. They're doing work on the project anyway. Just have them go in and take the 5 minutes to say what they worked on and how much work is remaining. When we talk about setting up time tracking, there's lots of options here. So this is not something that can be easily explained in 2 minutes, but essentially we're going through and setting up different categories of work. As we mentioned, we've got the pie. So we've got the KTLO or maintenance work. We've got administrative categories, the second bullet, which is non-working time, things like sick time and jury duty and vacation. It's going to debit from a resource's total availability. We've got traditional project tasks that would be part of a traditional project lifecycle. We've got time tracking tasks we may do at a higher level for less detailed projects, maybe business projects. And then we've got potentially agile activities we're tracking. So we really have to sit down and define these so we've got some consistency in terms of the expectations we have on the planner, but also on the team members that are actually delivering on the work. We want to train everybody on this. The first category there is maintenance work. The goal here is to capture time spent on non-project related activities. These are bigger buckets, things like help desk, operational support, break fix, where people are going to spend their time on that, but you don't need it at a very low level of detail. You don't know which help desk ticket. That happens in your ITSM system. I just want to know that they spent 2 hours last week on help desk tickets. They can do it once a week, enter the time, and then you have a view into their overall availability. It's really useful for IT management so they can see how much time was spent against these activities against their project work. And then what you can do is sit down monthly or quarterly or even annually and review that against what the forecast was. How much time did people spend on this versus time they should have spent? Administrative time or administrative buckets are really important, with the goal being to capture time spent on these activities that's going to keep them away from work. Things like, I was sick for 4 days last week, or I was on PTO the week before. It's really useful for management to clearly understand this, because then it, again, debits from that total capacity or availability for the system. And this kind of activities are always approved by a functional manager of some kind. Then we've got the traditional project work, which is pretty straightforward. We have in yellow a project name, the Atlas tracking software, and then below that we have activities, whether it's a high-level time tracking, but in most cases, like the Billingsley one, we're doing a south side roof rebuild. So we've got a certain number of planned hours on the right, 88888, and the team member is going to report their actuals, but they're also going to report how much work is remaining if they can forecast that. And that remaining work is like gold to a project manager. You did 40 hours, you have 200 left. When do you think you're going to finish and how much more is left? So if you're going to go over, I want to know that really early in the process so I can manage that as a potential risk. The goal here is to capture as much time as you can at the lowest level of detail possible spent on project work at a task level. Less mature organizations tend to roll that up to time tracking at more of a project level, and that's a good starting point. But really getting it out of that task level is really an operational goal you should have. Finally, Agile work. Most folks say, I don't want people tracking their Agile work. I don't want them entering data in 2 different systems. Well, the problem is if they're tracking all their Agile work in DevOps or Jira, and then they're coming over here and tracking their traditional work, you don't have a single picture of how much time people are spending on projects. At the end of the day, an Agile project is just another project. So you really want to think about, for an Agile project, like the CRM implementation here, what level do I expect my team members to track? I'm not as concerned about the plan here. I'm more concerned about the actuals. So, here I've got a feature. You can track it at a feature level, an epic level. It's not as detailed as a traditional waterfall project, but you want them telling you how many hours they spent on it. And this is also going to involve development resources entering data in their DevOps tool, where they're working every day, but also going to the PPM tool, maybe Friday for 5 minutes and putting the actual hours in. Also putting in potential finish dates, which are going to be rolling in an Agile system. So this could all be automated potentially with integration between those 2 systems, but you have to have the same level of detail in both systems, which we often don't find. So, Agile work should definitely be tracked in a PPM system, mainly for the value of figuring out when things are going to finish, who's working on what, and doing resource capacity planning. Really quickly, just a note about Agile work. The nature of Agile is about not tracking detailed work. It's really about delivering things quickly to market and realizing value, which inherently creates some challenges in the discussion we're having here today. So if you have Agilists in the organization or Scrum Masters, they're going to say, I don't want my people tracking time. Well, if you're paying them, they should be tracking time because you need to know what they're working on. And if you do have Agile in your organization, important to this is really developing a really sound strategy to allow for a couple of things. First and foremost, you want your Agile teams to continue to work very fluidly, so they're not changing the work style. It's all about removing any kind of barriers for them to deliver on products and value. But there's a need for management to get useful information to plan on resources so they know what resources they have against the work that's upcoming. And that means you have to come up to some agreement as to what goes into an Agile system and what goes into a PPM system. And having both of those systems in a single environment is completely normal. There's nothing abnormal about it. And trying to make an Agile system into a PPM system isn't going to work. And trying to get a PPM system do what Agile systems do isn't going to work either. You really need to have both and use the best of both for what they're designed for. The idea is to not create friction between these two processes and environments. So if you do want more information on this, we've done other webinars and we have a lot of experience pulling kind of the Agile and the waterfall world or the traditional PPM worlds together. Because you have all this data, the beauty of it is you now have data to run analytics. You have the ability to gain insight into where you are today. You can do a look forward, like you see in the chart at the bottom, or you can do your resource allocation and demand. So I can pull a report that shows me by role, here's the individuals, here's what their work is, and here's what the demand for those resources is over a certain period of time by skill set. So you can show raising and lowering demand over time against that capacity. You can export that out, like you see at the top, to an Excel report that's been pulled out. You can use Power BI, which we're going to show you next, to actually analyze this information. These tools are really useful for both the project stakeholders and the resource managers on the right, or the functional managers. Both stakeholders can look at the same data so they can identify trends and bottlenecks and really make sure they have the right people available. You're going to be able to use Power BI reports like this one here, where you can look at a resource and look at down at the bottom right, their availability, their demand, and then their capacity to see, wow, someone like Aaron looks like he's above his capacity for a 2 or 3 month period, but then it goes down and it's flat. So do I have other resources? And if I look at the left, you can see his work is broken out by project work, maintenance or operational work in their service management system, and KTL license, maintenance work, non-project work. We can also start to group our resources and do group-based reporting as well. Again, another Power BI report where we can look at certain resources like Erwin. We can see his maintenance work and the activities he's performing, his project work, whether it's Agile or Waterfall, service management work, all in one place. So we get an additive view as to what his work is, how much of that has been completed, how much work he has, and what his assignments are across all his different projects. Again, it makes it really, really helpful and useful to do this kind of analysis. And then, again, using Power BI as a layer on top of the Project Online system, we can then do role-based forecasting and say, well, if I look at a report like this, I've got the bright red. That's all my project managers. Which of the projects are consuming most of my project managers? So if I want to know, I've got 2 really big projects with most of my PMs, maybe I need to outsource for the other ones because I've got 4 big projects coming up. Or I can get into a detailed resource graph in Power BI. And this is where I can say on the left, say, show me the next 3 months, show me resources in a certain department or group, show me resources to play a certain role. We talked about setting up that metadata consistently, and then show me my assigned working capacity. Do I cross that line at a certain point? What's my availability? Does it go up or down as we get towards the end of the year? What program is consuming the majority of my resources? And finally, I can look at it as in terms of department. IT, assignment work versus capacity. If I look at HR, my HR folks are way over their capacity, as are my operations and sales and marketing. So maybe I really need to sit down and look at those projects and say, am I understaffed on those projects, or I'm not able to deliver? So it allows you to ask those business questions and make really smart forecasting and staffing decisions. The key is having the data. And then finally, being able to go in and do breakdowns on how individuals are spending their time. You can see in this Power BI report, we can select the administrative category on the left. So we're just looking at admin work. And then we can select director or the VP, but below that, we can start to see, hey, my resource spends 12% of his or her time on a service request, 13% on admin, 13 on break fix, 14 on project. Is that the balance I'm looking for my team or for an individual? And then I can reweigh that as I move into November, December, planning for work for the next 12 or 18 months. So it really helps me do better projections and make decisions in terms of the work I'm doing and the people I have doing that work. So these are all examples of reports we've done for some of our clients, just to show you what's possible. Okay. So, you've seen a lot around the technology. We've talked around the business process and some of the problems. How do you move forward? How do you kind of get the wheels going on resource management? What does it take? And the first thing we'd say is you really want to back up and take a structured approach to determine what are the business problems you're trying to solve. You really need to sit down and figure out the process and the technology together. The first thing we always recommend that we look at is getting started. And our experience shows there's a direct correlation between 2 key parts of project management, between project schedule management on the left and the ability to successfully and accurately plan and manage your resources. It's very, very difficult, in fact, almost impossible to do one without the other. We've worked with a lot of organizations that take a resource-first approach. Let's address resource management. Forget the project planning, project management. Let's just do resource management. And they only do a very rudimentary project management process improvement. They don't really upskill their project managers on better tools. They don't educate their project managers. And what the result of that is a huge gap in the middle. It results in not having enough information to support good people planning, which is what you want on the right. So you end up spending a lot of time and money on the right, not on the left, and you end up just wasting all of that. So a really good first step here is really to work with your project management community to improve and mature their project scheduling capabilities. And it may seem fairly obvious, and it's what PMI talks about, and building good project schedules and keeping them up to date. The more detailed your project managers can become comfortable with on a day-to-day basis, the more detail you're going to have on the right side of this picture. And it's going to give you the ability to see what people are working on, what are the activities that are out there, how much work is actually getting done, and what are the gaps or the opportunities on your projects, your programs, and your portfolios. And we'll tell you that kind of starting with that t-shirt sizing in the beginning is really fine for annual planning. But when it comes time to actually deliver your projects, you need to have task and work level detail, including a plan, an actual, and a forecast, even on your Agile projects, to accurately plan resources. There's just no way around that. This is what works. An example of this is some organizations we work with set up time tracking tasks on a project, but then they have their project managers managing the detailed work at a little more detailed level. What happens is you get work performed and managed, but they're tracking detail and reporting on it at a different level of that. So you have a disconnection between the expectation for the team members and the expectation of the project managers. An example of this in the Agile world is, hey, I want people tracking time against an Agile project, but I'm tracking my performance at an epic or a sprint level. You really need to align those things and make sure you're tracking the work at the same level the performance management is happening at. And really the reality is it's more work to do this, but the results give you the ability to understand and plan your resources in a useful way. And the key to better planning here is really improving on your project scheduling. People spend a lot of time on upfront planning activities. They get really excited about a project, and then the wheels get going and things kind of fall apart. And that's really where you need good consistency, reinforcement, standards and processes, and execution to really deliver on this successfully. So when we talk about how can you get started, it's focus on the left and use that to drive the right, because one without the other is very, very difficult. So, in summary, we want to go through just some of the things you can start to do to improve your ability to plan and manage resources in PPM. As we mentioned on the last slide, don't want to overdo this, but really focus your training efforts on improved project planning and execution. Tie resource management into that. They're directly coupled and linked together. It's very, very difficult to do one without the other. You want to also understand and align with Microsoft's interpretation of resource management. We showed you, the 13 different areas you can address. It's not a matter of lighting it up and using it. It's a matter of setting it up in alignment with your organizational processes, almost more than any other process you have as it relates to using this tool. There's definitely flexibility here to start by a crawl and start doing basic resource planning and project planning, then move to more of a walk and move to a run. It's completely normal to do, but you have to start with project and resource management together. You want to think about also implementing improvements to resource management at every phase in your life cycle. We have a lot of organizations say, hey, we're going to address resource management first, then we're going to get into risk management, we're going to do enterprise program management, all this stuff. No, actually, resource management underlies all of that stuff. It's hard to do program management without resource management. It's hard to do risk management and risk mitigation without resource management. So tie resource management and improvements to that into your overall work plan and your overall roadmap for PPM. But definitely, the way things are going in industry and probably in your organization, you have to develop a plan for tracking Agile work. And you want to develop a plan that doesn't change how Agile teams work, but you get the detail you need to be successful with your planning around resources and people. And finally, there's a lot here. We showed you a lot of things and a lot of capabilities and possibilities. You may want to think about partnering with an organization like Progility. We've successfully rolled out resource management and PPM and improved project scheduling capabilities. And we know all the gotchas. We've seen this stuff dozens and dozens of times. We can actually walk you through different scenarios and help you make the right decisions. So if you are looking for assistance, definitely reach out to a partner who can really help you drive success with this, because there are different moving parts here. So that's what we wanted to go through today. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Sarah, who's going to go through our Q&A. Sarah?
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Rob. If anyone has any questions, please type them into the Q&A chat box. So, Rob, I do see we have one question from Michelle. She stated, our enterprise resource pool is created by using Active Directory. Most of the resources do not have their roles and specialties, etc. listed. Could those be added to resources in Project Online after they have been pulled from Active Directory?
It's a great question, Michelle. So absolutely. Yeah, the most common way that's done is Active Directory is used to pull the resource credentials over, but information such as their skills and their roles typically isn't in Active Directory. It's in another system or in a spreadsheet somewhere. So most PMOs we work with actually go into the resource pool and they set up those unique fields of information, and then they keep that information up to date. They're actually managing that in the resource pool directly. And that's a good approach to it. Absolutely.
Great, thanks, Rob. Again, if anyone has any other questions, please type them into the live Q&A chat box. We'll give you another few seconds here. All right, well, I guess that's it for questions today. Thanks a lot, Rob. To learn more about how Progility can assist with improving and implementing resource management with your Microsoft PPM system, feel free to contact us through the info listed here. We'll set up a time to review your needs and provide recommendations. Again, I'm Sarah Howard with Progility. Thank you all for attending our webinar today. Have a great day.